if you don't have that other, that other thing that you're working with, that you're engaging with, I don't care how much technique you want to throw at something. Like, so much of what I teach with Meisner and what Meisner is all about from the very beginning is just like, okay, we need to learn how to really just listen to each other. Let's do that. Let's learn how to actually really just be with each other and listen to each other and actually take in the reality of what's actually happening in the moment. Let's do that, because for actors, if you don't know how to really fucking listen to somebody, I don't give a shit how much technique you have. I don't care to see your work.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Well, it's that time again, folks. It's that time for a podcast. It's me, Evan. Over there on the other side is Brandon. We're going to have a chat about something that's... this one has a very, I think, artistic... a lot of our conversations are very broad themes, like artist perspective. This one is maybe a little bit more directly involved with artistry. So I always like to have these conversations and get into them, just because, it's an important part of what we're all about. And hopefully we do find some bigger themes within this conversation as well. I'm sure we will. But this one, technique serves you until it hurts you. And this is something that I feel personally very strongly about. I have for a long time, and it's recently like bubbled up to the surface for me about how there's this kind of confusion that often happens within the artistic worlds and artistic mediums, where you're trying to learn how to do something that you care about very deeply, and go and you want to learn the techniques and you want to learn how to get more proficient on different levels. But as we're getting into with this conversation, it has a limit. It has a ceiling. And unless you start finding a way to break out of that, unless you in some ways you learn how to put an end to technique in yourself, you will always be limited. And in that way, it hurts you. So that's the general setup, I guess, for this one. Brandon, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I'm really happy that we went with this title, because I think it's one of those titles that really does very clearly summarize what we're talking about. And sometimes we get a little creative and we're like, let's kind of, open it up and we'll make it a little more broad. But this one's very specific. And I think what happens for a lot of people is when you're trying to learn something, you really want to do it well. And technique becomes this kind of like, it's like, oh my God, I figured it out. I found the way. As long as I do this, it'll work. It'll be great. And at first, technique, when it's good, kind of works like that. It actually does feel like it's the answer. It's the way. It's like, all I have to do is follow the technique, do the technique, and I'm good, right? And then you find out at a certain point that isn't it. It brought you to a certain point and it just doesn't serve you anymore. It lets you down. And then maybe your answer is, oh, I know I don't have enough technique. I need to find more technique and more technique. And I remember you shared this story many times on the podcast, how you're doing 3 different acting classes at one point, and you're like, what is going on? And I don't know if this was true for you, but I can relate, because I remember being in 2 different classes at one point and just being like, well, I could do this class and I could learn that. And just technique wasn't helping me anymore. It just wasn't doing it. And, I would say, actually, there was a few really great acting teachers I met throughout my journey, but Ted Whittle, who I'll give a shout out to, Ted showed me that a lot of what I was looking for was actually this like hidden inside of me. And the technique almost needed to be abandoned. And I needed to trust the process of, which wasn't even really a technique, but it was just like the best way I could describe it is an agitation. It agitated something in me that provoked a vulnerability that I did not understand. I had no idea where it would go, what it would do. And there were times where we did work in his class where, he's even shared that it was like kind of surprising for everybody. And not just for me, but for other students as well. And it was really quite profound because the technique got me to a certain point, but then I literally had to drop it all. And I had to but here's the best analogy I can put, I think, Evan, is technique is like the armor you put on to go into battle. And then you get into battle and you take that armor off and you do battle in a very vulnerable way without the armor. But the armor got you into the battle and then you almost take it off and you're like, but I've worked so hard to get this armor. Why wouldn't I use it? And it's like, no, because now if you try to use it, it weighs you down. It slows you down. It's too heavy. It's too cumbersome. It actually stops you from being able to do all the moves that you know how to do or whatever, you're not free anymore. And so you put the armor on only to take it off. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I remember Ted saying something similar to me at one point in his class when he was just like, I have nothing that I can teach you technically. And it's like, so, we're going to work on the rest. And I think that's part of the challenge with this is it's that rest thing that is not as easily teachable. In fact, I might argue that it's unteachable, right? We can try and speaking as a teacher now myself, it's like, it's really about trying to just create an environment, a space in which that other thing, outside of technique can happen, right? Like it's, but it's not really something that a person can be taught. It's something that it's kind of like a personal journey that a person has to, that an artist has to go on, which is, okay, how do you tap into that other thing? You've equipped yourself with all of this stuff, some of which you'll need, some of which you won't.
Yes.
Right? It's become a part of you to some degree, because I want everyone to know this is not mean like you don't need to learn anything about it, right? It's like, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. Like learn some stuff, but don't make the mistake of thinking that is the thing. Like when I teach Meisner, which isn't a technique, even though people call it the Meisner technique. It's not really what it is, but Meisner, he had sort of famously said, like, I don't want to see your technique. And the moment your acting becomes about the technique, like you're fucked, right? Like you're done. It should never ever, any art form should never ever be about the technique.
Yes.
Right. It's not about the technique. The necessity of art is something else entirely. The reason why we create art, which I won't say why, because that's a whole other conversation in itself, and there's a million different answers for it, all of which would be true in some way. But what necessitates, what gives human beings the drive to create art is not technique. That's not where art comes from. Art does not come from technique. But we live in a kind of culture and a society where that is where we put so much focus on. It's like, okay, we need to teach you all of this stuff. All right, out you go. right? You get into your art school, your theater school, your film school, and because those are teachable things, right? And you can walk away feeling like, aha, yes, I've learned all of these things. But you don't necessarily know how to actually tell a truly heartfelt story that comes from some deep place inside of you that expresses something on behalf of all of humanity, that connects us all together in something that's vitally important for the existence, not only just of ourselves, but like of the souls of ourselves. This is just, I'm just spitballing a couple of the many different things that art fulfills in us. Technique does not do any of that shit.
Yeah.
It doesn't do any of that stuff. And it's incredible. And I'm gonna say one more thing, just on a more from my own personal experience kind of note, which is like, if you don't have that thing, it doesn't matter how much technique you have. You can heap as much technique on something as you want, but if you don't have that other thing that you're working with, that you're engaging with, I don't care how much technique you want to throw at something. Like, so much of what I teach with Meisner and what Meisner is all about from the very beginning is just like, okay, we need to learn how to really just listen to each other. Let's do that. Let's learn how to actually really just be with each other and listen to each other and actually take in the reality of what's actually happening in the moment. Let's do that, because for actors, if you don't know how to really fucking listen to somebody, I don't give a shit how much technique you have. I don't care to see your work.
First of all, I loved your epic rant, and it reminds me of why we do this podcast, because you and I are bought into that. We've experienced that. We've been in acting classes where incredible things have happened, and the world will never see it except for the 12 people that were in that class. You know what I mean? It's like, and it was moving to the point where it made you laugh, it made you cry. I still have friends, and I know you do too, where we talk about things that happened in an acting class that not only moved us, but like shifted our lives and made us remember that person forever. And they got it. They got that other thing for a little bit, and we were so proud of them, and we were so grateful to be there. And I think that's a big reason why, we do this podcast, because we've had those experiences. And, I'm not trying to speak for you, but I think I know this, is that we wish that upon other people. We wish that they could have that, because it breathes life into you. It makes you understand why this is all worth it, and all the suffering and all the things that we go through and all the trials and tribulations and challenges in life. When you have that, it makes that all seem inconsequential and also not so overwhelming. And I think that's a big part of what the other thing does. And I actually think that this isn't a full answer of why we have art, but I think it's part of the answer as to why we have art. I think we do want real, true art that is in that other category, because it does that. It gives our suffering and our challenges and our meaninglessness in life, it gives it some weight. It gives it some purpose. It gives it some kind of answer, and maybe only a Band-Aid solution at times, but that's enough to get you through something. And I think that as an artist, aspiring to try to give that to your audience, whether you're an actor doing a performance or a novelist writing a book, you can save lives. You don't think of it that way. And most people think artists are, oh, what are you doing? You're just going around playing and imagining or whatever. And it's like, man, you have no idea how powerful story is, and until story starts working against you, and you're drowning in an ocean of depression, and you just need a life raft. And then all of a sudden, a movie or a book or a song or a painting comes along and it gives you that life raft. And all of a sudden, you see, wow, I can stay afloat a little bit longer. Someone shared something with me, and it made an impact. And the only way you're ever going to get there is you got to let go of technique. But the technique might have helped you to get to the place where you could let it go, you know?
Yeah.
But it's a very vulnerable thing, this other thing we're talking about, you know, this letting go of the technique thing. It's not an easy feat, but we're trying to have a conversation about what it is and why you would do it.
Yeah, I think it's, and in many ways, I think it's very much an important part of the journey for any artist, you know, where it's like, okay, you know, you have to, in some ways, immerse yourself into this and put a focus on these things. And hey, it shows you a lot of cool tricks, you know?
Yeah. Cool tricks.
Yeah. And, you know, and it can be like, you know, it's kind of like, sometimes it's almost like a little magic trick. Like, oh, wow. Like, look at how that happened. And we can become, you know, like we can get sort of glazed over and impressed with what these things can do, and not to knock that on to really at all, because there is a value to it. But then it's just like the problem is, I think, is it gets stuck there, right? Like, as we were saying in the title, it serves you until it hurts you, right? And I think the hurting part becomes when you get stuck on it, when you get stuck on the technical bit of what you're doing, when it becomes so much about that thing as opposed to a real, genuine, heartfelt, soulful expression from you, which is really what it's all about, right? And that expression from you that reaches out into the hearts and minds of everybody else, that's coming from something that's real, something that's real in your humanity. And that doing that requires a whole different level of engagement that goes far beyond technique. You know, like my other acting teacher, Larry Silverberg, he would say like your acting doesn't fuel your acting, life fuels your acting. And I get that more and more deeply as time goes by. You know, it's like I actually just had a student, a past student, reach out to me and was just like, hey, can you recommend some acting books to me? And sure, yeah, absolutely, I can recommend some acting books, and I will, but I'm also planning on saying, hey, but also I want you to check out this book by Alan Watts. I want you to check out this book by Jiddu Krishnamurti. I want you to read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. I want you to engage in something that's outside of just the sphere of acting. I want you to engage in something that is in that other space of being human, because one of the things about the study of anything, right, which is very much where developing technique has a lot to do with, it's the study of something, right? There's a sort of observation and application. And with that comes putting words onto things. And as soon as you put words onto things and trying to describe something, particularly with art, as well as with life in general, but as soon as you put words onto it, there's already that, in a kind of way, brings in a strange filter or barrier to the thing itself. Even though it's a description, there's language is by its very nature reductionistic. As important as it is, because words are important. Don't get me wrong there either. Words are extremely important, and words are extremely powerful, and they can teach us. They can lift someone up. They can tear somebody down. They're incredibly powerful. But nevertheless, words are inherently reductionistic. It's kind of built into it. It's never the thing, it's always a description of the thing. So in trying to take a piece of art that came from the heart and soul of somebody, like you look at anything, whether it's in popular media or more avant-garde type of art forms, you look at anything that has really touched people throughout human history to today, trying to describe what it is that makes it great is never actually the thing. Like when you're looking at a great piece of art and it makes you feel something, and then you try and describe what that is, it's like, it's never really the thing. It's never really that thing that you actually felt inside you, right? Like you're trying to indicate, you're trying to point to it in some way, but it never is the thing that you felt. So I think I had some point to all of this. Like it's just, but it is always reductionistic. So it's like, in many ways, this is kind of where I was coming, like the technique is always a reduction of something. It's always a reduction of the art form that you are in, which is why it has a limit, which is why if you want to be really great, if you really want to experience how you do what you're doing, you need to put an end to technique in yourself at some point.
Wow. Yeah, I mean...
Sorry, I'm getting on some soapboxes today, Brandon. I'm getting on some soapboxes today.
Don't apologize. It's all good, man. It's... I agree with you on the words being reductionistic and like, I do think... So I think... Okay, well, where I'll take this, where I will take this, you see something, this incredible piece of art, and you're like, wow, whoa, like I feel things, I'm moved, it's so cool, it's so great, I love it, I want to watch it again, or read it again, or look at it again, or listen to it again, or whatever, and maybe even taste it again, but you don't understand how it was done. And I think there's this part of the artist is like, I want to know how they did that. I want to be able to do it too. And so you almost look for like a recipe, you try to break it down into its smallest parts. And I think technique, it does a fair job at doing that when done well. And I'm not saying it's always done well, but sometimes, you have kind of people who have a way of kind of breaking something down and explaining it and simplifying it and bringing it to its parts and showing how the parts relate to each other and how if you put them together, you'll kind of get this result and this is what will happen. And I think the result of technique is this kind of little magic trick. It's like, wow, like, look, I've done it too. I've created it. And the thing that doesn't always get communicated when you're learning technique is that there's this kind of approach, this feeling, this experience, this quality, that this energy, I'm using kind of these interesting words here to try to describe this, but they get put into it. And like some people, they go, well, like, when you make food, putting love into it doesn't matter, but it kind of does, because when you put love into it, think about that. I put love into the cooking. Like putting love into the cooking is like, I know that you like it a little sweeter. I know that you like it a little saltier. I know that you like this a little more than that. And you tailor it. And so when it comes to your art, you tailor it, maybe not always to someone specifically, but maybe in some case it is tailored to someone specifically, but it brings something to it. And I would say that, for me, even with this podcast, there's an art to it for me, because whenever I speak, particularly on this podcast, there is always in the back of my mind, myself at 16, 15, 16, right around there. My parents were divorced. We lost all our money. My best friend kind of traded me in for another best friend. It was rough. But I always think of that kid who was lost and confused and kind of like, just going to movies to try and figure things out, and just, was spending a lot of time on his own, and his parents were off they were a mess, and my brothers were out of town and all of that. And I think about that kid and how alone and how lost and how just trying to find some answers. And so when I speak, it's with the love towards that, and there's a nuance to it, because I'm trying to give myself, to some degree, the things I felt I needed at that time in my life. And I'm sure that there's audience members out there who maybe they hear me speak and they think, oh, that guy's an idiot. He's an asshole. He's whatever. I don't like him. Fine. But there's other people who it just hits them. I know it. It just hits them and it lands with them, because I've had people reach out to me and they said, thank you for what you said on this episode. And thank you for being so vulnerable. And that, like, there's a certain amount of love. And it's not just that, like, it's for myself, but like that love is being infused into this conversation, and it's beyond the technique of trying to communicate. And a lot of the time I'll forget what I even talked about on some episodes until I re-listen to it later, and I go, oh, that's kind of interesting. I said that, but that's where technique kind of goes out the window a little bit. You have to let it go, and you have to just kind of, infuse it with this other. I like how you kind of used it, Evan. You called it this other. I like calling it this other. There's technique, and then this other. There's this, ether of other. What is that? That's kind of the magic, right? The unknown, vulnerable magic.
Yeah, that by its very nature you can't really put words to it. Like it's that part of it that won't be reduced.
Yes.
Right. That cannot be reduced. It's just, it always escapes it. You can try and describe it. It's like, yeah, it's kind of like that, but not exactly, not always even. It's
totally,
just like, yeah, there's a lot that you said there that I'm like, oh man, I want to, there's a few things that I want to touch on. I love that you brought love into this, because as always, that's a component that gets overlooked over and over and over again in so many different ways in our lives. But yeah, like in art as well, it's like, you're talking about just even like cooking. Like I love cooking. I love making a delicious meal. And, and sometimes you're thinking about the love for the person that you're cooking it for, right? And so, yeah, and you tailor it in that kind of way. But also, and I think this is what I sort of recognize in great chefs is that they have a love for the food and the ingredients themselves. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, it's like, I love this spinach, I love this cut of, meat. I love this. And it's all about, and that love for it is actually what's guiding what they're doing. Because it's just like, I'm trying to honor the ingredients. You hear chefs talk about that, like they're trying to honor the ingredients that they're working with. It's like, how do I do that? And that's a kind of love. And it's just like, okay, I'm trying to pull out its flavors, but I not overdo it on certain things. And, and just letting some things kind of come through as naturally as possible. Or, there's so many, that's why it is an incredible art form, and it can be brought to the level of art. And one other thing I wanted to say as well, that I think is lends an interesting perspective to this, is comedy, because comedy is another incredible art form that has a particular importance. Like, I think every art form, there are so many similarities to them. Like, they all kind of, like, what applies to one of them usually applies to pretty much every other art. But sometimes certain ones have like a very special thing to say about, or they have a really strong, there's a really strong importance on one thing that brings a new level of understanding. Comedy, I think, is one of those things, because it's like that thing where you explain a joke and it's no longer funny.
Mm.
You know, like coming down to saying, like, yeah, you can break down a joke and say, oh, here's the technique. This is what was done. Well, that's not funny. The explaining of why it was funny, that can be interesting, but that's not funny. You know what I mean? And also the thing with comedy as well is that in a way that it almost defies technique. Like, even though that there is a lot to crafting a joke, but it seems like comedy is one of those things where how a joke is crafted is always changing. What was funny 10 years ago isn't funny today. You know, like, comedy is one of those things that
definitely true.
Like, there, it's very rare. It's not that it doesn't happen, but it's very rare that comedy stays funny. There are some, like, you think of like some of like the like legends like George Carlin or something like that, where their comedy is still so incredibly hilarious and relevant. But to a large degree, like, you know, a comedy movie that you laughed at 10, 15, 20 years ago just isn't really funny anymore. It's one of those things, because comedy works in the unexpected, right? Like, it has to deliver you something that you don't expect in order for it to be funny. And there's no technique for that to a certain degree. Like, you can have that knowledge. It's like, okay, I have to deliver something that people don't expect, but technique can't tell you what the fuck that is. Mm-hmm. Right? You have to work more with your own senses. I think that that's what's an interesting thing about comedy, is that, like, you have to really, it's one where not, and again, everything that I'm saying is very relevant to other art forms, but comedy is one that is kind of easier to maybe understand this principle with, because a comedian has to work so much with their senses, with their intuitions, with their, you know, like with that other space, right? And then they've got to try it out and see how it goes. But I think it lends this interesting perspective, because comedy is in its very nature shifting so quickly. So quickly. It's like, we don't want to hear the same jokes that you told, you know, in your last comedy special. Like, I want to hear something new, because I've already heard the joke. And I maybe will laugh at that joke a couple of times hearing it, but eventually, no, you got to give me a new surprise. You have to do something else, and technique just can't deliver that for a comedian, which is part of, I think, what's so daring about it as an art form. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
There's something that I remember learning when I was really early on in my creative career. It was that greatness always has either or this or either all of this, but it always has this in it, which is it either has a sense of humor, a sense of sexiness, or a sense of danger. And if it's missing one of those or all of those, then it doesn't work. And if it has one of those or more of those, then it tends to have a landing. Now, the way I think about that is, okay, so like think of sexiness. Like sexiness is like an attractiveness. You're like drawn in. You like want it. You like want more of it. And you can see this with certain certain things. It's like you can't stop listening to that song. There's an attractiveness to it. There's a sexiness to it. There's something about it, and you just want more. It's like you're almost in love with it. You're satiating for it. And then there's this sense of danger, and I think this relates a lot to comedy as well, because I find that a lot of comedy that's too safe is not funny. It's just blah. But like stuff that kind of when the comedian says something, we all kind of want to say, but they say it and they figure out the right way to articulate it, the right way to do it. It's a little bit dangerous, but they figured out how to make it not so dangerous to say. And it gives you a voice, and it gives you a certain amount of power, and it pushes a line. And I love that about comedy. And I think a lot of people do. And then this whole thing about like comedy, I think like the sense of humor is like when you can look at something that could be super dark, super hard, super just brutal, and you can see the humanity in it. Because I think that's what humor really is. I think humor is humanity. And you can see the lighter side of the darkness, which can save you. And it can also give you a life raft. It can do all sorts of incredible things. And I think, there's this kind of like, but like, how do you teach the technique of those three things? Right? Like you can say, oh, like, wear this outfit, put this makeup on, do your hair this way, like, use these colors, use whatever. And like, that's attractiveness, that's sexiness, but it's like, not really, there's something more to it, because there's a lot of beautiful people, but they're not all sexy. They're not all attractive. They don't all make you just gotta just in awestruck want to look, you know what I mean? Or hear it or taste it or whatever it might be. So I think there's this other quality. It takes those three things beyond technique, and it takes them into that realm of like, okay, it's sexy, but I don't even know why it's sexy. I don't even know why it's attractive, but it has something about it. It's just this untangible thing. And I think that can be daunting when you're like, well, I want that. I want that for myself. And you go, okay, but you're not going to find it by breaking it down into its smallest parts and working it out and doing the math on it. That's not how that's going to happen. It's going to be messy. It's going to be messy, and it's going to be found through a vulnerable exploration of self, And that's kind of like, when we're talking about this, I think there could be a frustration for the listener, like listening to this, if you're like going like, I want the answer. Like, what's the answer? Like help me do this. And it's like, yeah, the answer is let go of the answer. And I know that's scary. And you're like, well, what if I never find it? Here's something I learned. And I've said this a few times on recent podcasts, but like, don't worry so much about the answer. Worry about the question. The question will give you everything you ever desired. The answer will give you almost nothing. And I think technique gives you the answer, and the other gives you the question. And that's why you want the other. You want it to provoke curiosity. You want it to provoke wonder. You want it to provoke, because if you're in wonder, you might actually put someone else in wonder. It's a self-serving mirror projection. It's like, as you're living it, you're doing it, and you don't know it until you're in it, so you got to like let go of understanding even what you're doing in your art.
Yeah, because so often just having an answer and saying, oh, well, this is it, that can just put an end to wonder, which is
Yeah.
is such an essential ingredient in creativity and artistry and learning and discovering. You know, it's like there's pretty much nothing in this world that like there's just a definite answer to. There's very little, even like our oldest sciences are changing constantly, you know, like everything's changing. So it's like when we settle on answers, or when we're just trying to have answers, that's like another part of this limiting factor to it. I think I remember there was like a quote from Al Pacino on that subject too, which was like, you know, he's less interested in finding answers about the parts that he plays as he is interested in asking questions. Right. And just ask the questions is sometimes enough, right? Let the questions drive and fuel what you're doing. Because there's a different state of being and creating. There's where you're just a bit more open and a little bit more free. And who knows what can happen? You know, I think that's part of why it's so important, is because there's still that space left for who knows what could happen. Right? Because which
is the danger.
Yeah.
You need that. You like, if you want to have danger in your work, you have to have that. Oh, I don't know how this is going to play. I don't know how this is going to go.
Yeah,
I don't know how they're going to take this, you know?
Yeah, like manufacturing danger is kind of like an odd thing, because in a weird way that removes some of the danger from it.
Maybe all of the danger. Yeah. Because like you can't, well, I don't like the word can't, but I don't really think you can authentically manufacture danger. I think that it's like you can kind of set it up, but if you want to feel real danger, it needs to have this sense of like out of control. You know, because like I remember when I was a kid, I was never scared of well, no, there was a period where I was scared of theme rides, but then I kind of got over it. And when I was scared, what I remember was I felt like things were out of control, and that's why I was scared. But then there was a certain point where it was like, well, this is actually really well controlled and figured out and sorted. And I was like, what's to fear? And I just like, yeah, it's going to spin me upside down. It's going to do this stuff. But like, and then I started to learn about accidents that occur at theme parks. And then I was like, ooh, actually, this is a little bit scary again. You know what I mean? Because then I was like, wait a minute, human control can actually protect all air. And that brought the fear back a little bit, which was actually kind of made them exciting again. But the thing is like, when you feel things don't have that room for error, which goes for your art too. Your art needs to have room for error. It's just not scary anymore. And it's not scary for you, and it's not scary for the audience, because I really do think that the truth doesn't care about your technique.
That's a quotable right there. That's
why I stopped talking, because I was like, wait a minute, that's actually... I think I said something good.
Yeah. I think I said something good for once. Yeah.
Said something good.
That was good.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great.
The truth doesn't care about your technique. It really is true, though. I mean, you know, I think about your Meisner teaching, and I had a wonderful time in your intensive workshop. But, you know, I'd say like that's why I liked it, because in your intensive workshop, you facilitate a really good program where the truth does not care about technique, and there's no basically there's no hiding it. At least if you do it the way that you did it with me, you know, in that group, the technique is, you just have to like be like, okay, I'm out in the middle of nowhere here, and I'm furious. Like for me, I'm just explaining my experience, but I'm furious, and I just have to be like, well, that's the truth. So, and I was embarrassed that I was furious. In a way, like not even just as an actor being that furious, but like as a performer being furious at this person and being like, trying to be like, you don't need to be so angry at her, but I'm angry. And I'm like, I'm angry. I'm not going to pretend I'm not angry, but I'm also the amount of life that's going on, because that anger is just, it was, and for me, Evan, I don't know if you witnessed it, but it felt dangerous to me because I was like not going to get violent, but I was like at that point of like, I want to be violent. And I'm like, where the hell is this coming from? You know what I mean? And I think that at least in that moment, I think everybody was engaged, because all I know is that I was engaged. And I tend to think that when I'm fully engaged, and I found this with other mediums, writing included, that people tend to be fully engaged. It's kind of this weird, we're in this together thing.
Yeah. I remember, I do remember that. And I remember your partner as well, having a discussion with your partner, because they're like, oh, I was actually like really scared because he was like actually really angry. And I was just like, well, just so you know, like you were never in danger, you know, because I know I've known you for long enough and know you as a professional and what you do. And that's, for acting, that's crucial, because, you know, a great actor, despite what might be going on for them, has that little thing in the back of their head that's just like, I'm not going to hurt somebody right now. And if you don't have that, then get out of acting. Because you're a danger at that point. But anyhow,
can I say one thing though? And I don't want to stop you, keep going, but it's the 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We've talked about this. You have 1 foot in, 1 foot out at all times. And the good artist has 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And they as much as you're in it, there's still a part of you that can be like, they call cut and you're like, oh, okay. Imagination break, you know?
Yeah. There's just always this part of you that's just like, hey, it's all for show. Right. Yeah. Like it's all like, it's like this little winking. Yeah. This little winking face, this smiling, winking face in the back of your mind. Yeah. That's going on a ride, right?
But wouldn't you say, Evan, I know I'm totally like kiboshing your track, but wouldn't you say life is like that too, though? That you can always kind of be a little bit like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's just life. Like, I think that's kind of way of the artist, right? That's kind of what we talk about in a way where it's like you mentioned actually before we started the podcast, you were talking about this Alan Watts thing where it's like suffering only becomes a problem when we identify with it. I think was what Alan Watts basically drew attention to. But isn't that the same as saying wink, wink, nudge, nudge? I'm not like, I'm experiencing suffering. I'm not like, I can step out of the fact that I'm the character in the story, like brutally suffering. And you kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's like, like, we're all just kind of like living, you know?
Yeah, it's this fascinating thing where so there's a few things I want to talk about. Like, one of the things is an interesting observation that I've had, particularly within, like the work that I teach, when I went through it, but also seeing other people going through it, including yourself, which is like, you know, it's kind of comical in a way, because actors are so much, you know, talk about like, I just want to lose myself. I want to lose myself in the part. And then you get brought to a place where that's actually happening. And you're not pretending to be angry. You're not pretending to be scared. You're not pretending. You are actually fucking angry. They are actually fucking scared. And that scares the shit out of us. You know, like it actually happens for you as an actor.
You're the thing that you've been scared.
Yeah. like, you know, it's like you've been wanting to lose yourself. You're wanting this so bad. It starts to happen and it scares the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny, but it's because it's like, oh, wow, I'm actually feeling something right now and not putting this on. And I feel a little out of control with it. And it's, and once you become, you know, my experience is like becoming sort of comfortable with navigating that space, like not comfortable trusting myself in that space is really more what it is. It's like, whoa, I'm actually feeling this thing right now. And coming back to what you were saying, yeah, this sort of like exhilaration in that, you know, like the smiling, winking face in the background that, you know, that's like, I am shaking with like I'm actually shaking with real rage in the middle of a performance right now, where I like, yeah, like I feel like I could just like punch this person in the face, right? But being like, but I'm not going to, because I'm having such a great fucking time right now.
Yes.
And that's such an, like, it's hard to, like, what even is that? You know, like, how do you, like, it's so hard to even articulate that space, because it's so exhilarating, you know, and I think this is one of those fascinating aspects that, that acting has an interesting perspective on, right? Because it's like, whoa, like, how can you occupy that space simultaneously where you are actually feeling fully this extraordinary emotion, but there's a part of you that's having an absolute blast doing it. Right? Like that's just like, yeah, oh, it's just it's all for show, but you are fully committed, immersed, experiencing this thing that's happening. Yeah, it's great stuff.
It is it's really great stuff. Yeah, it's you know, I you know, there's something I think that brought up for me, which is that, you know, as an artist, right? Like maybe you're out there and maybe you want to do great work in whatever medium you're doing. And all I would say is, like, my humble advice would be, when or if you find yourself in this place of this unknown, untangible, unexplainable medium of this other that we're talking about, don't run from it. Just like, let yourself be in the magic of it, you know, and reward yourself with it, give yourself that. And like, it's not always going to be the way you think it should be or the way you want it to be. It's not always going to be like that, but there's something about it that you'll be thankful for this, like, this letting go, because you're going to find out, if you let it happen, you're going to find out that there's something going on that you don't quite understand. And that is an incredible part of the human experience. And I don't know if everybody always has that. And I parallel a little bit to like driving a fast car or something, you know, and when you feel that G-force, or you take that corner, you know, and people who have been in a vehicle, they understand what I mean, who have pushed a vehicle to some limit, which I don't even claim to have pushed it to some of the limits that people have pushed it to. But if you push the vehicle, a mechanical thing like this, to a limit, and you felt that kind of shaking on the road, that like, oh my God, like we could flip, we could go off the edge, we could like lose it, right? There's something about that place that's just so, it makes you so present. And I think ultimately, actually, Evan, I'm realizing as I'm talking about this vehicle thing, it's kind of like what we're talking about is presence, really. We're talking about where technique meets presence and presence takes over. That's what I think happens, because technique is like, yeah, I'm doing the thing. I got all the right pieces in place. And then all of a sudden presence takes over. And it's like, okay, no one gives a shit about how nice your tires are. No one cares about your paint job. No one cares about anything, because it's the rubber meets the road. And it's like, what can it hold up to here? And you're finding out simply by feel. Simply by feel. And you get better and better at finding the line of that feel. Like you can push it further and further, and you can get a better sense of what's going on. But it's like, it's just presence and feel. And you have to, when you're in a vehicle, I can say it's kind of like, maybe this is a little more tangible and helpful for people, but it's like, there's like a vibration. There's like a certain amount of force There's a certain, it's hard to explain, but it's in your body. And you can't tell someone what it feels like. That's all I know. But I know what it feels like in my body because I've spun out in a car, and I've also hit that line where I've just about spun out. And I know what it feels like. I don't know how to explain it other than it's this sense. And you just kind of know. And not every vehicle is the same. That's the other thing. Some vehicles can hold it a lot harder and a lot longer than others to a greater degree, and other ones can't. And you just get that sense. You just kind of know what it can take, and you can like push that line. And I think the other is where the technique begins to just not be enough to answer the question anymore.
Yeah. Because in many ways, like I love that you brought presence into this, because this fits with a lot of the things that we've talked about with presence and things. Because in many ways, technique is old.
Yeah.
Right? Technique is from the past. Technique is what is already known. And creativity and art, real art, comes from the unknown space. And the unknown can only be engaged presently. You know, you can't engage with it from the past, right? You can trust that the tools and the experiences that you've had in the past will help you to not always, but will help you to address some of the things that you run into, but you can't possibly know what those things are. So when you're working from like a technique first approach, you are basically refusing to enter into that unknown space.
Oh man, right? Something just hit me. Can I share?
Yeah.
Okay. So I love what you're talking about. The past gives you a reference point to the present, but it doesn't answer the present moment. When you're in the present moment, you can call upon it, but you can't rely on it entirely. But you can, if you have good technique or good disciplines, you can kind of go, okay, like this is the best practices, so I'll use it, but I don't know what it'll do. I don't know how to help. And here's a story that can maybe help demonstrate this point. There's a period in my life where I was like really broke, and I was like just kind of trying to get by. And, in my car, the wheels on my car were so bald that I was probably dangerous to even be on the road, but I like had to drive, and I had to, I was like, should I even drive anymore? I was like, cause I can't change my wheels. I didn't have enough money to get new tires onto my wheels. It was like, it was in desperate times. And I remember I was coming around a corner. It was raining, and all of a sudden my car started sliding out, and I was going to hit a wall. I was going to hit a barrier. And I was just like, okay. I remember when I started sliding, I was like, okay, I'm hitting this wall. And I just hit total acceptance. And I was just like, okay, just like it was just peaceful in a weird way. But as I was sliding out, I went back to my practices of, you're sliding out. This is what you do. This is the right technique. This is the right thing to do. And I slid and I slid and I slid. And then just before I hit the wall, my tires caught, and I took the other direction. And I was like, whew, that was so close. But in that period of sliding, I think there's this, when you're in this other that we're talking about, there is this kind of like, I don't know if it'll hold, like, I don't know if I'll catch traction. And this line between acceptance and danger and kind of like letting go and kind of almost being like, it's not that I just gave in this moment and said, I'm hitting the wall and I'm just going to let go of everything I know. I held my tires. I held my wheel a certain way. I did what I needed to do to pull out of it if I could. And sure enough, I got to a point just before, and I was able to pull out of it, and I didn't hit the wall. I didn't hit the barrier, and I was going to, like, and if you were a passenger in the car, you probably would have felt the same thing. It was this weird, it's a weird experience to explain, but there was a period in this probably only happened in over a few seconds or a second even. It was probably so brief. But that memory, it felt like a lifetime. That's the kind of crazy thing about the other. You're in this like moment, and that moment is like an entire lifetime. I can recall so much about it because it's like Spider-Man time, you know, everything just slows down and you're just unbelievably present. And there's this weird line between having control and being out of control. And when you know you don't have control, it's a weird sensation, but it's an important one in the arts. You know, this we do so much to control, but we also are looking for that out of control. You know, like we try so hard to control it, but what we really want is to be out of control. It's so weird how that works, you know?
Well, it's like that, maybe like taking it out of like that control thing, but to be like that adventure.
Sure.
You know, like that adventure. That's what we're looking for. And, you know, it's just but adventure implies not in control, lots of things that you don't know, because otherwise it's not an adventure.
Yeah, it's just a routine. Right? Just boring. Yeah.
And to just like to readapt some of like your what you brought in with your story about the car and stuff, like, yeah, you know, like this provides a bit of a metaphor as well. It's like, you know, your technique is your car. You've got your car and you've got your knowledge of how to operate the car. The destination that you're heading off to, that you've never been to before, that you don't really know what to expect when you get there, is that journey from wherever you are to it. That's the art. You know what I mean? That's the art. It's full of the unknowns and turns, and you've got this stuff with you. You've got this kind of knowledge that's just like, oh, okay, left turn. Oh, okay, left turn, left turn, left turn, left turn. Right? Oh, okay. Here's a beautiful view. Let's stop. Right? Like you have these things that you've got that you can put to use, but you don't know how and if and when those will need to be put to use. Right? But you have them there. Like they're,
yeah, when or if.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're gonna
not be need. It might not be needed.
Yeah.
Sometimes technique you have and it's not needed, and sometimes it is. And sometimes you have technique that you never use until some moment comes up, and then it's like, oh, I need to know how to do this, and you do. You know, and you know, and like I think that's the great thing about this conversation is what we're talking about. It serves you until it hurts you. It helps you until it just doesn't matter anymore. And then at a certain point, you have to let it go. Otherwise it will hurt you. You have to, like, you know, just be like, hey, I'm in a new territory. I'm in unknown, you know? I remember talking to my cousin when I was a teenager, and I was saying, like, we were talking about, like, well, what would you do if you were in a situation where, you know, someone put a knife at you and, you know, and you were cornered and blah, 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 and they were going to hurt you or something, something along those lines we were talking about. I just can't remember. He goes, well, at that point, it's just jump in and swim. At that point, it's just, you're just going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to do the best you can. Mm-hmm. And I remember really, like, that answer kind of really landed with me, because it wasn't really an answer, but it was an answer in the sense that, like, what are you going to do? You're going to roll over? You're going to, like, that, maybe that's an option. I don't know. Like, what are you going to do? But, like, at that point, you're in it, and you're going to have to deal with it. And it was a silly what if question, but his answer was perfect, because it's like, there is no answer. The answer is you're going to deal with it however you're best fit to deal with it. You know, and I think, like, so much of art is like that. We put ourselves into situations, we don't know how to deal with them, and then you're going to deal with it as best you can when you get there. And let's see what happens. And that's quite interesting for audiences, apparently, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's, I'm probably not going to say this quite right, but I was recently just reading about, like, ancient well, like ancient, but like sword masters, like Japanese sword masters, and there was certainly a kind of training with form, but it was always stressed a relaxed form of being, because in the heat of battle, it wasn't going to be perfect forms, and you just end up trying to if you were too stuck to the technique of things, you would just constantly be trying to like get yourself into the right stance all the time.
Yeah.
When it's just like, and that would basically mean death. If you were just too concerned about how you were standing all the time, you were unable to improvise and to move with a kind of relaxed form, while also being able to keep some of what your technique is, so that you can actually respond. And I thought that was a pretty fascinating thing, because that's literally a life and death situation.
I mean, nothing is more life and death than like the samurai situation, because if you don't know about that, the idea was one strike, death. And actually, traditional karate is like that actually as well. I studied it for a little bit, and I didn't go very far, but I found it extremely, extremely powerful and effective, because essentially what you're doing is you're learning a technique to be able to drop somebody with one hit. And if you get hit and the person knows what they're doing, it is game over, done. Like, it is done. There is no second chance. The sport of karate is many hits, many points, but the actual technique of traditional karate, if done properly, is you're hit, it is over. And samurai is very much similar. You get hit with that sword, it is over, it is done. And so the precision and the level of intensity is so high. But there were disciplines and technique that you learn, and that technique is absolutely vital for your success. But one thing I have learned about fighting in the small amount of study I've done, but the one thing that I have found to be true, because I have been in fights before, is that when you're in a fight, everything goes out the window, man.
Yeah.
All the stuff you think you know, oh my God, it's just like chaos. And the ability to be calm and controlled, it takes an incredible amount of like discipline. I don't know how to describe it, but like it's profound, because the amount of adrenaline, the amount of things that are going through your body, you just,
Yeah. And it's, it's like that whole, that thing, like Mike Tyson quote, like everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face or something like that.
I mean, that's exactly it. Yeah. Exactly. Until you get your bell rung, until your head is and your vision is a blur, and you've been hit in the head and your nose is bleeding or something like that, and you can't see, and and every hit could hurt, and you're trying to figure out what to do. I mean, the desperation, and can you bring that to art? I guess that's the question, right? Like, can you if you're going to do a fight scene in a movie, can you bring that element to your fight scene? Because that will make it something else, right? As opposed to this would look cool. This would be a great technique. This would be fun. This would be visually cool. Can you bring that feeling? Because really, I think that, if you can do that brings people to a new place. And I mean, I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, not just bringing yourself to a new place, but bringing your audience and your viewers and your listeners and your readers and whoever else to a new place, right? Mm-hmm. There's no way for us to tell you how to do it other than to say, learn your technique until you got to let it go. And then maybe you'll stumble upon it, and maybe greatness will occur. Maybe something cool will occur. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Evan, I'm going to share my beer if you don't mind.
Yeah, not at all. I was just about to say.
Okay, great. So I've had this one before, and it's another Sawback Brewing Company, which I've had a lot of their beers in this year. Um, this is the Hazy Blonde Pale Ale. I had this one before. I loved it before, so I had it again. Um, Mostly just because it was hard for me to get a different beer today. I just couldn't find any place that had any other beers than stuff that I had. So I knew it was going to be a repeat. But I got this one again. And interestingly enough, when I bought it, they were saying this one is so popular. We're selling so much of this. So the Hazy Blonde Pale Ale by Sawback Brewing Co. I'm not just a fan. Apparently everybody is a fan. And you knocked out a really good beer, because for the second try, I'm just giving it 2 thumbs up again. So there you go.
Beautiful. I'm drinking a beer from Bomber. I haven't had one from Bomber in a long time. I don't know if we've had this one before. I don't think so. And this one is called Georgie's Best Dry Hopped ESB.
Nice.
Yeah. Whoever Georgie is, not sure. But it's good. Yeah, it's really nice. It's been a long time since I've had an ESB, which is why I think it kind of stuck out to me. I was just like, oh, it's been a while. It's been a while, ESB. Let's do it. So, yeah, real solid. Real solid.
Nice.
Well,
any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'll take a kick at the can here. No, I'm glad we got into this conversation. I feel like I probably got everything I needed to get out on this one, like early on to some extent, but no, there was a lot of really great sort of discoveries and things that we got into here, and you know, I hope that at the very least, if you know, even for myself, it's like a reminder, but for anyone listening, you know, like as a bit of encouragement to just start exploring what we've been referring to as the other in this thing. Like, let go of the technique. Trust that you have the technique, you know, that you have it with you, and you know, continue to learn, continue to grow, but just know that it will never take, it will only take you so far. Technique will take you so far, but no further. And that's something that you've got to wrestle with. Like, if you want to take your work to another level, that is simply just a thing that you're going to have to wrestle with and find your own ways. Sometimes you got to find a new way every single time into the heart of whatever it is that you're doing. Right? But that's great. That's a fantastic thing. That's not like, don't be discouraged by the fact that there's no step 1 through 5 to creating fucking art every single time. You know, like, treat it as an adventure, right? As I was saying before, like, it's an adventure. Go on that adventure. Be excited about that adventure. Be excited about what could happen, what surprises there might be. Trust yourself and your ability to respond in that process, and that you got the tools you need to do it. And if you don't have the tools, well, you know what? You've probably got enough that you can hang in the pocket for a while you're getting yourself, while you are, you know, regrouping and getting whatever it is you need to continue on, right? Like, but it's you know, it's weird. Of the last couple of weeks, I feel like I've been telling so many people, just trust yourself. Trust yourself. You have more, you're more capable, and you have more to offer than you think that you do. So just go on the adventure, and you're going to be all right.
Wow. You know, we talked about a lot of great stuff. I love this conversation. It was a lot of fun. And I think that it's one of those things for me I'm constantly in the search of, always, this unknown, this untangible, this other place. And I think that's why I continually come back to art, because I love finding myself in it. And I've done it so much now that I'm actually quite comfortable there in a weird way, like uncomfortably comfortable, because it's not always comfortable, but it is wonderful. Yeah. Look, I'll tell you this. Whatever you're doing, there's so much stuff that is inside of you that is yet to be shared with the world. And nobody understands it. Nobody knows it, not even yourself. And your task is to try to share it without knowing what you're about to share.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.